Welcome back to the Nassauman Hockey Podcast. James Nichols and John Sella here with you as always, and we welcome a very special guest today back to the show. Everyone's favorite media personality, Nick Alberga, joins us today. Welcome back, Nick. Thanks for joining us.
Isles Nation, what's going on? Great to be with you once again, and thanks for having me. What's going on with you guys?
Same old. Looking for as much as we can get this summer, right? Because as we all know, it's been the summer of Lou, and that doesn't necessarily mean much in terms of transactions and such for the Islanders, but it is now September. Training camp is just weeks away. Prospect camp is today as you're listening to this, and we still don't know who's going to be there because again, Lou Lamoriello. But we're gonna push past the prospects and we're gonna get right into the nitty gritty. Nick, you're on the NHL Fantasy Podcast, and I was looking at some of the projections and stuff, and point totals and everything, and even some breakout players that you had named. And I want to start before we even get there. And before we talk about any individual Islanders, what are your thoughts on how the offseason played out for the Islanders heading into next season?
It's funny, you call it the summer of Lou. I call it the summer of poo. I expected way more for the New York Islanders, boys. Like, I think they're a team that's on the precipice, clearly a couple years back removed from back-to-back conference finals, and this is how you reward the fan base. And I understand it's a tough league. It's tough to make transactions like this. You got to believe in somebody who has the pedigree that Lou Lamoriello does. But I, for one, come away very, very disappointed with where I thought that team was going. I expect to bounce back still. Like, I think you look at that roster composition, I still think they're a really, really good team, notwithstanding a 13-game road stand at the start the season. I think is going to be a big time. The fact that they won't have to be on the road for 13 games, like, it was just crazy. They were, not to make excuses for them last year, but they were up against it right away. So, I think it's going to be a competitive division. I think when you look at the Islanders, I think they're better than what some people are giving them credit for, but I would have liked to see a bit more. I just think they need that bona fide sniper, guys, whether it's a Vladimir Tarasenko or, if it was somebody, Johnny Gaudreau or, even, Vander or Nazem Kadri, is coming off a fantastic season as well. And they just have been unable to solidify that hired gun, if that makes sense. So I think it's been a disappointing offseason, quite frankly.
I want to ask just a quick question, James, before you jump in. Can the Islanders afford it at this point? I'm not talking about the dollars and cents. I'm talking more about on the asset front, because I have a hot take after you answer this question about my opinion on where the team is, and we're trying not to jump too far ahead. Trade deadline next summer, the Barzal situation, but it is. I have a hot take for the rest of the season, but I wanted to get it from you. Do they have the assets really to do that? Again, forgetting about having to move contracts out and all that.
I think anything's possible. I think ultimately it depends on how they feel about this team. As we know, they have some prospects. They have a goaltender who's a year away from UFA status. Like, there are some guys you can move around and you can make anything work that you want to put your mind to it. But as we know with Lou Lamoriello, like, he's got a price tag. If you don't meet it any way around it, whether he's selling or buying, he's just not going to do business with you. And it is an old school approach, but I think we're in the land of, like, you look at Pierre Dorion and Brad Treliving, how they really went after things, Jarmo Kekalainen. I think you have to be, you got to be assertive, but you also have to be aggressive. And Lou Lamoriello over the years has been somebody who's been very, very, very patient. And he seems to acquire that guy when you don't expect it to go down. So I would say expect the unexpected. I think he's involved in a variety of different conversations. And to the best of my knowledge, I think the Islanders have the assets to make it happen. It's just more so the stubbornness of the GM, I think.
So my hot take is that if they can't do it with this group as currently constructed, that's it. Stop spending assets. You don't have it. You have a few players at this point in Ratu and Dufour, maybe Dufour, and Salo up and coming and Dobson. I don't know. I don't know how you do it without actually moving out some of the bigger contracts. If it doesn't work with a Bailey and a Palmieri and a Pajot, you really gotta not rebuild but retool. Something some other teams have done in kind of short order. I don't know that you can supplement it on this roster. Like, it either works as constructed as Lou wants it to be. I don't know at the trade deadline that they make a move. Like, if it's not working by that point, I'm of the mind just kind of like let it ride and go to the draft or whatever and get assets back for some of those things and figure it out from there.
I understand the pessimism, but again, I just have to like I do truly feel like last year was an anomaly. Like from the get-go. Like we were all excited obviously with the new arena and welcoming it into the NHL, but to ask a team, and I know there's some breaks in between, but to play 13 straight road games, I think just cursed them for the season. And again, I'm not making excuses. I'm the last person to make excuses for this franchise, but I think they were up against it. And then you add in COVID and all that, you add in injuries. They just never got cooking. And that's why I
Oh,
think
I
this
don't, I
year
don't
we'll start to
disagree.
see. Mhm.
I don't disagree
Yeah.
at all. I'm
No,
just saying,
yeah.
now there's no excuses at all this year. Like,
Yeah. No, I
granted,
agree.
there's
I
not like a
agree. Like,
billion injuries, but go at
yeah.
this year like you mean to continue and make decisions from there. I suppose, but I don't know that you can spend another first round draft pick or whatever. That's now 3 or 4 years in a row without a first rounder. James would know more than me on that. I think it's 3 years in a row, no first round draft pick. So it's this group or bust. Like they either can
Mhm.
do it or they can't. And then next
Yeah.
summer, you have a few more contracts off the books. You can figure things out. But I want to get through this season first. But I was just wondering what you thought about on the assets front before we
Yeah.
jump too far into things.
James, how do you see it?
It depends on, like John said, if they're in the equation or if they're not, right? If they're not in the equation, there's no reason to spend a first round draft pick, especially in the upcoming draft that's been pegged as one of the deepest in the NHL, or coming to the NHL in a long time, right? You have Connor Bedard and a number of other guys who can be labeled as possible franchise players moving forward. But if they're in the thick of it, Nick, I'm with you. I think that this team does have in them for a rebound year. You're not going to see, aside from the plethora of obstacles they had to start the season that Nick mentioned, you're not going to see Kyle Palmieri going missing for 29 games at a time, not finding the back of the net. You're not going to see, I don't think you're going to see another performance that Mathew Barzal put up last season, where he was inconsistent. Like when we'll talk a little bit about him later, I think he has the tools to be among the best in the NHL, but he's got to put it all together. You're not going to see a guy like Anthony Beauvillier, in my opinion, go missing in a non-trot system anymore. It's going to be similar, but I think he might, I mean Lambert might let them wheel and deal a little bit more. But that actually leads me to my next question, Nick. Lane Lambert did state today or yesterday that he's comfortable with this group. He's perfectly fine with running it back with these guys. Is that just hockey talk, or does he actually see something in the group that he has?
It's somewhere in between. To answer your question, I think this is somebody finally getting an opportunity to coach at the NHL level. So he's going to say and back up his GM whatever way he can. I was very curious about that, Barry Trotz. Like, I just would love to be a fly on the wall as to how all that went down. And then you sort of don't hire outside, but you bring somebody who's already been there within and Lane Lambert to coach this team. Very curious, but I think it could mean a small difference and a tangible difference for a lot of different players on this roster. Like, the one guy I'm looking at is Oliver Wahlstrom, right? He seemed to be secluded on the third line under Barry Trotz. Does he get a permanent look in the top six? I think he's a massive breakout candidate this season. I think he make fascinating points as well on the likes of Barzal and Beauvillier, and Nelson's coming off a fantastic year. Like, there's guys on this team who can score. I just think you need that player who goes above and beyond, that hired gun, if you will, that you see across this league and you see teams winning. Quite frankly, I think that's what was missing from those Isles teams who kept losing in the conference finals, is they didn't really have that guy to score the big goal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you wanted to see Mathew Barzal become that guy, as soon as last year when the team was down and they needed somebody to, rise up and put the team on their back. You wanted Barzal to break out, and just put himself in because that's a player who, in my opinion, has the tools to put his name in the same conversation as the McKinnons in this league and the McDavids in this league. Like, when you look at him, he's got that flash, but he's got to put it together. A little more about him later, but that being said, 2021-22 was an anomaly, Nick, you say. So
Mhm.
your opinion, the Islanders make it back to the postseason in 23?
I do. Like, I think this division is obviously much improved. You have Johnny Hockey going home in quotations to Columbus. I think that makes them a better team. I think Elvis Merzlikins is a better goalie than leading on the last couple of years. I think the Devils are a better team. Like, no doubt there's going to be stiff competition, but I think if the Islanders play their brand that we've seen and maybe modify it a tad under Lane Lambert, I think Ilya Sorokin has the potential to be a Vezina finalist this season. And I expect much more from contract here, Semyon Varlamov. Like, I didn't think he was particularly good for the most part last year. And if you get that tandem cooking, and we've seen in the past, the Islanders are a tough team, and then we expect maybe a bit more offense, especially if you can get Oliver Wahlstrom going. Like that's a big player for me moving forward for this team.
Yeah, so we spoke about Oliver Wahlstrom a little bit, and now talking about individual players here, you
Yeah.
alluded to the fact that maybe deployment was a little bit of what hindered Wahlstrom's development last season. But going into the season, maybe he'll receive a top 6 role. What is it specifically though about Wahlstrom that makes him one of your breakout candidates aside from deployment? What are you seeing in his game that you like him as someone who can break out this year?
Well, it's like supply and demand. Like, this Islanders team doesn't have that bona fide sniper, but do they, right? Like, I just think you look at the body of work, you look what he's put together throughout his career, you look at that brick tournament video when he was 11. Like, this guy's got all the factors and the abilities and the talent to be that guy that you're looking for, right? And you don't have to pay him $7 million per season. Again, it's like little changes in the hockey world and the sports world that go a long way. And I just think maybe like a different voice leading the charge, I think could go a long way in the progression. That's obviously a big word we're looking for when we're talking about Wallstrom, is progression and growth. And to me, I just think it's the pizzazz, it's the talent level. Like, I just think you think New York Islanders, they're a gritty, hardworking team, but I think Wallstrom has the ability to be that type of player, but go above and beyond and be that finisher that they're actually looking for.
So, similar question, but for a different prospect, if you will. He's not so much a prospect anymore, but in Kiefer Bellows, he hasn't really had,
Mhm.
too much of the same sample size as Oliver Wahlstrom. But you look at his, pre NHL career: 41 goals with the Portland Winterhawks, 50 goals with the U.S. National Under-18 team. This guy knows how to put pucks in the net. Is it a supply and demand thing with him too? Does he just need the opportunity and the deployment? Does he have the tools to make it or hack it at the NHL level?
Well, that's going to be the big time question with Kiefer Bellows, right? Like, again, you can't use the excuse of like Barry Trotz. You have Lane Lambert in the mix now, and he's at an age at 24 where it's sort of make it or break it time, right? And I think the Islanders realize that if he can't stick and be a full-time NHLer and prove his worth, then I don't know if Kiefer Bellows is going to be long for this New York Islanders team. But I mean, to that point, like, he's going to get every opportunity, I think, in training camp to not only crack this roster, but be a prolific piece on this roster. I think, depth is so big in this day and age in the NHL. You need your third line to score, you need your first line to score, you need your fourth line to chip in from time to time. I think clearly there's an opportunity and a spot for Kiefer Bellows. At this point, I think it's up to him to seize it, and he can't really make excuses anymore. So I think it's a massive year for him.
I hear you on that. The 1 year deal really screams, prove it, right?
Yeah.
And although he hasn't really been given that opportunity, he did get, the 1 year. John wasn't in love with the 1x2. He kind of said, what's the $1.2 million for? He didn't really do anything. Do we have to sign him for that much?
Well, for another
Um,
guy, who could you have signed that was further along? You could have signed Sonny Milano for probably the same thing, and who has the creativity, who really could have pushed the limit. Bellows isn't going to create that internal competition with a Wallstrom, a Parise, a Bavillier. Milano would absolutely do that, and again for the same price. And if you do have an injury, Bellows was just kind of thrown in there, and he didn't he's not a top 6 player. So you're really just, is he just an insurance factor? They know him for Parise. It just didn't make any sense. Like, for what he actually offers and what else was out there, like if you were going to make a sneaky little move, I feel like a Milano would have made a lot more sense.
Yeah, I would just add that it's clear that they still see something in him, right? I think there's obviously that attachment to a homegrown player like that who's been there from the draft. Like, again, there's so many different factors and things and intangibles behind the scenes that we don't know about either. But like, I see your point. I think you see an opportunity as a fan base or with the team to better yourself immediately, and they don't take it. You start to have questions. But again, Bellows is hoping this is the year, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it does become puzzling, like you say. You see that talent out there, but
Yeah.
and I think even Lambert did say recently that he doesn't anticipate any PTO. So, this is largely what they're going to get. They're going to have competition from within. They're going to be battling with each other for roster position. So we'll see what happens with Wallstrom. We'll even see what happens with Bellows. But those are two players much like you, Nick. I had my eye on going into training camp because one of the other things too about Lambert is I think he's a little bit more willing to work with his youth. I know that he was a large part in um, the development of both Evgeny Kuznetsov and Tom Wilson when they each had breakout years with the Washington Capitals. So I think he'll be more willing to work with those guys in the lineup. Not sit them for an entire period or bench them after they had a bad game or maybe a couple of bad shifts. So that's going to be important for the development of those two. And I think that's part of the reason. Much like you, Nick, I'm not sure what the thought process is when wasn't firing Barry Trotz, but I think that has to be part of the reason why Lambert is now behind the bench is having the willingness to work with the youth and develop them a little bit better.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a fresh voice and a new voice, right? I understand he was there, but you know what I'm saying. I think you look at Barry Trotz, it was quite definitive why he was brought in. He's a closer. He got them close, won a Stanley Cup with Washington. He was a big time free agent, found his way to the Islanders, and it made a lot of sense. But I think obviously they've turned the page, and I think you're bang on in that assessment. The hope is that Lane Lambert can do wonders more for those types of players than he can for the vets on this team that we saw time and time again. Barry Trotz, Lou Lamoriello have put so much trust in those guys, but let's not forget it's a young man's game. So without your young stars like your Barzals and your Dobsons, you're going nowhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of Barzell, we alluded to before the fact, or I alluded to before the fact that I think he has the tools to, be in that conversation with the McKinnons, the McDavids, right? He's got that flash. He's got that flair. Contract year Barzell, 59 points last season. Do you see a bounce back from him this year? And does he put himself in that conversation?
Yeah, 1,000,000%. Like this is the guy I've identified it. In fact, in fantasy hockey, that I think he's in my top 100. I know Pete and Anna over at NHL.com and NHL Fantasy have him slotted a bit lower, but I feel a bit higher. I think in Mathew Barzal, I know, it's just the recency factor, right? And even the fact that 2 years back he only played 55 games but had 45 points. I think we're more likely to see the Matt Barzal who's closer to a point per game than we are to see the one that had 59 and 73, which is pretty damn close. But I agree with you completely. I think there's another level for this player to get to. And it's crazy what players will do when they're motivated by a potential of a new contract. So all I'll say is watch out for contract year Mathew Barzal, as you just brought up. And I think he's going to be a very motivated and driven player this year. Because whether we believe it or not, I think players take things to heart sometimes more than they should. And even your coach got canned, right? So wake the hell up. I think across that roster, it's sort of a trigger to get cooking and to get going and know that it was unacceptable what happened last season, regardless of everything around them.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you there, and it kind of reminds me too of the when you said players take things to heart. I think he wanted to be a different kind of leader than John Tavares was when he was with the Islanders. I think he took it to heart
Yeah.
actually that John Tavares left, and so I think that he is a little bit branded by that and wants to make sure that he is not only a vocal leader but a visual leader for the locker room as well. So but a
Yeah.
lot of that has to do with, who is he going to play with this season, right? We saw a revolving door of that last year just because, there was the COVID stints that certain players went on, and then he was on one as well. So the door kept going and going. But he needs consistency this year. The anticipation is that it's not going to be that kind of season where there's going to be a lot of misses because of COVID. Fingers crossed, right? Parise was on his wing for a while. Wallstrom was on his wing for a little while. Anders Lee started the year there with him. Maybe Kyle Palmieri gets up there. Who are his ideal line mates on this roster right now for you, Nick?
Okay, so we just talked about Oliver Wahlstrom. We think he's going to be a top 6 player. Mathew Barzal is one of the better playmakers for my money in this league. I think that's a duo match made in heaven right there. So I'd have probably, Wahlstrom on one wing in my perfect world and Lee on the other wing. I think you have to set players up, with a chance to succeed and be the best that they can be. And what better than having Anders Lee, who's a hired gun, a sniper when he's at his best, and Oliver Wahlstrom, who has the potential. To me, that's the perfect trio. It's your number one line, and then you go forward to Brock Nelson as your number 2, right?
Yeah, I've said that a couple of times too to John. I think I've said, I love the idea of having Mathew Barzal just skating circles around everybody and making everybody confused on the ice. And all of a sudden, all Oliver Wahlstrom has to do is get open and shoot the puck. And if that puck doesn't
Hmm.
go in, well, Anders Lee is one of the better net front presences
Yeah.
in the league. He's just going to be there and clean up that garbage. So I absolutely agree with you there. The only problem there is Lee and Nelson found a little bit of chemistry when they were paired up last season.
Rekindled
Um,
chemistry.
Hmm.
right,
They
rekindled.
had been a pair for years before that.
Yeah. So, and a couple episodes back, we had Shayna Goldman on the podcast from The Athletic, and she had wondered and was curious about the possibility of putting Anthony Beauvillier on that line to not only revitalize him, but give them a dynamic line with speed. What are your thoughts
Hmm.
on how to elevate Anthony Beauvillier's game and if he can find his game under Lane Lambert this season?
Yeah, I think the main word with Beauvillier is consistency. Like how you can go from a guy who's scoring 6 goals in 4 games, 0 and 16 is beyond me. But like again, with a lot of young players, consistency is an issue. So that's more of my question with a guy like Beauvillier. I think he's proven that he can score and produce and provide at this level. But again, along those lines, players in that age demographic, like consistency is a thing and proving it night in and night out. I like that look too. I think this day and age we put way more stock in line and deployment than we should. I think obviously we're going to see a variety of different combinations, especially now with Lambert. Who knows what kind of ideas he had, as Barry Trotz's right hand man. So I think you'll see Barzal with Lee, you'll see Barzal with Wallstrom, Beauvillier, Palmieri, Bailey. Like I think all these guys are going to get a legitimate look, and that's what training camp is for. And then the expectation and hope is that you drop the puck for game 1 of 82 and you're ready to go and you're scoring goals, right? I think when you look at this Islanders team, you think they're going to be strong defensively. You have Sorokin, one of the best goaltenders on the planet. Where's the offense coming from? And I think if they can get that consistency from the Beauvilliers, the Barzals, the Nelsons, the Lees, and obviously Oliver Wahlstrom, I think that puts this team in a really, really successful position, or at least a position to succeed this season.
Yeah, I think with Pavillier on that top line, a 25 and under line for the Islanders would help kind of kick that this roster's a little old thing down the road. If that's your top line, then you have 3 lines of veterans. You don't let's put the defense in your back pocket for a second. Let the kids go. Let them do their thing. There have been a lot of lines with success around the league like that. And Pavillier and Barzal have still been around for 4 or 5 seasons now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not like they're super young, but 25 and under that, they're both 25 this season. Wallstrom is the only under there. That could be exciting. I say at least give it a shot in the preseason. Let them run, and that's a lot of speed, and that's a lot of skill, and on the shooting aspect. So I'd love to see that, given how much Palmieri played with Pajot really well, Lee and Nelson. Then you're kind of just rearranging a couple of wingers here and there.
And again, I just don't think this team is far off, James, from where they were, a couple years ago. Again, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe I shouldn't. I know there's a lot of pessimistic Islanders fans considering how last year went, but we just talked about it's been a crazy last 2.5 years with COVID and the breaks last year. Like I just thought it was hell for a lot of teams, and the Islanders were top 5 in that conversation. So I'm very, very curious, and I just don't know if they're getting the respect they should be getting right now going into the season.
Yeah, I hear that, Nick. And one of the things about that too, and something I constantly like to remind people of is, they went to back Eastern Conference Finals, and you can say, oh well, the Tampa Bay Lightning did it too. But this summer, right, was the longest summer they've had since before Barry Trotz to rest, to recover. There's not going to be one, as confirmed by Lane Lambert today, there's not going to be one player coming into training camp who's dealing with a lingering injury or anything of the sort. So
Yeah.
a well-rested team with a chip on their shoulder. There have been people who have said this team is garbage. They're going to finish last in the Metropolitan Division. I'm with you, Nick. I think they're a wild card team. They could even compete for second or third in the Metro.
Yeah, I think it's a blessing in disguise, quite honestly. Like, it's a really, really good point that they've had this long, long time off to really dwell on what happened last season, but also recover from what happened last season. So you can't make that excuse anymore. They're going to be fresh. And I think there's opportunity, and I think the word we're looking for again with this team is structure. Like I really don't think it matters that much who's on this roster because they play so much like a team. They play the best team game for my money in this league. They have strong D, they have strong goaltending. So work to your strengths, and I think we'll see that Islanders type team again this season.
Nassau Hockey is brought to you by DraftKings. The NFL's opening week was action-packed, and it's just getting started. Get ready for week 2 of touchdowns, big plays, and even bigger wins with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. This week, new customers can bet just $5 on any football game and get $200 in free bets instantly. Want more action? Everyone can experience the thrill of DraftKings early win promotion. It's simple. This Sunday, bet on any NFL team to win. If your team leads by 10 at any point during the game, you get paid instantly, even if your team loses. So download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use promo code THPN to get $200 in free bets instantly when you place a $5 bet on any football game. That's code THPN only at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details. Nassau Hockey is also brought to you by Raycon. Lately, John and I have been listening to a lot of hockey podcasts, and it's been great. One reason it's been so great to listen to? Well, because we use Raycon wireless earbuds to do it. Raycon's everyday earbuds look, feel, and sound better than ever. With optimized gel tips for the perfect in-ear fit, these earbuds are so comfortable and they will not budge, trust me. Raycons give you 8 hours of playtime and a 32-hour battery life. Raycons are priced just right. You get quality audio at half the price of other premium audio brands. It's no wonder Raycon's everyday earbuds have over 50,000 5-star reviews. The Raycon wireless earbuds John and I both use offer 3 customizable sound profiles, earbud tap functions, noise isolation, and my personal favorite feature, the awareness mode that lets you hear outside of the earbuds when they're in your ears while listening to songs, podcasts, video games, whatever you're using your Raycon wireless earbuds for. Not only have I been using my Raycon wireless earbuds to listen to podcasts, but I've also been using them to listen to music, play video games, watch TV shows, pretty much anything audio related that I need. So go to buyraycon.com today and use code THPN15 to get 15% off your Raycon order. That's code THPN15 at buyraycon.com to score 15% off. Buyraycon.com, code THPN15. So I think a big theme of this podcast so far has been the term bounce back. And another player I'm looking at for a bounce back season is Kyle Palmieri. You saw how he finished his season last season, right? We alluded to the fact that he only scored 1 in 29 or 2 in 30 games, something like that. And then he went on 14 in his last 40. He went on a ripper for that one. And this is a player who, when he was in the prime of his career with the Devils, he was a consistent 25 to 30 goal scorer. Can he get to that point again this season with the Islanders? And what does his deployment need to look like? Should he be in the top 6, or is he pegged for like maybe a third line bottom 6 role?
Yeah, and talking to a couple players too, he's noted as the hairiest player in the NHL, top 3. So we love Kyle Palmieri being an Italian as well. I'm with you. Like last year was really, really difficult. Like he never really got cooking, but in the second half, specifically in the last 20 games, and I know this because I had him in fantasy hockey and watched quite a bit of Islanders hockey. It seemed like every time he touched the puck, it was going in the net. He had a couple disallowed goals that one game. There was like a flurry of like 3-4 games where it was ridiculous. Like, and some of them should have counted at that. So when you're hot, and that's what happens when you're, a consistent goal scorer in this league. So I think a couple more go his way. It's an easy 20 goals at least. Like my expectation, if you want to set the bar low for Kyle Palmieri, 20 goals, but I'm looking for 25 to 30. And again, like it's always been scoring by committee with this team, right? For as long as I can remember. Again, and I still think, and I'm anticipating they pick up that hired gun eventually. But scoring by committee, and you can expect 25 to 30 from Kyle Palmieri, that is the extra boost you need to help your Wallstroms, to help your Barzals, your Lees, your Nelsons. Like it just goes a long way. So if you can get a bit more from Kyle Palmieri, I think it leads them in the right direction at least.
Yeah, so it's funny, right? Now we're talking about goal scorers, and the narrative around the Islanders has constantly been, well, they need guys who can put the puck in the net. But we talk about Kyle Palmieri, who can score 25 to 30 goals. We talk about Oliver Wahlstrom. If he has his breakout season, maybe he gets 20 goals, right? Andrews Lee, you can
Yep.
book him for 25, 30. Brock Nelson just came off a 37 goal season. Can he reach 40? Or does he regress back to his shooting percentage because it was a little elevated this
Yeah.
season,
Agreed.
which is always a possibility. But now all of a sudden you're talking about a bunch of players who can score you. Anthony Bavilier, we didn't even mention. If he has that consistent year, 20 goals for him, no problem. Something he's done
Yeah.
before. All of a sudden they have a bunch of guys that can put the puck in the net. So now we're talking about a team who not only has a bunch of goal scorers, but it's throughout the whole lineup. And I didn't even mention the fact that Casey Zizekas at one point has scored 20 goals.
Yeah.
JG Pajot at one point has scored 20 goals. So we constantly talk about the narrative that the Islanders need more goal scoring, but really, like you said, Nick, the scoring by committee is there.
And it adds up too, right? I think you just look at recent winners, Colorado. I know it's all about McKinnon and Rantanen and those guys, but the depth scoring was massive. Your Nichushkins of the world, your JT Confers, your Nazem Kadris. My perfect example is the St. Louis Blues. Remember that season? They had Alex Steen on their fourth line, ripping 15 to 20 tucks a year. There's just
Yep.
depth in this day and age of analytics and the way the game is played. It's acceptable to have a guy who could be a first liner play on your fourth line or your third line or boost his minutes in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Like, it's a way different game and a way different ball game at that. So I totally agree with you. And again, scoring by committee is not a bad thing. I think it brings you to a certain level. And then in the postseason, you need, those players to get you over the top and score those big time goals.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I want to transition to the blue line for the Islanders here.
Yeah.
And I was reading some of the point projections for defensemen by NHL Fantasy. And it projects quite an uptick in offense for the Islanders on the blue line. I'm sure. Did you take a look at that, Nick?
I did. I'm just chuckling because Pete Jensen is a New York Islanders fan. So,
Well, let's
so
let's read off the projections for the Islanders top four here, and they're
yeah.
projecting Noah Dobson to have a repeat season, maybe do a little bit better with 55 points. Ryan Pulock 40 points, something that you could see happen. He scored 35 a number of times before. Alexander Romanov 33 points, and Adam Pelech 30 points here. What's causing this optimism that the New York Islanders blue line will suddenly have this uptick in production?
Yeah, so we talked about this the other day. Like Romanov, Pete felt like he was underutilized in terms of the power play with Montreal. So maybe he runs a second power play unit. But then what does that mean for the other guys you just mentioned? I just think Pete and I were in unison, and Anna as well, that last year was more so of an anomaly, as we've discussed in the first half hour here, than it was the Islanders just being a crappy hockey team, if that makes sense. I think there's obviously a lot of positives to grab from this roster, and there's the expectation that they're going to provide more offense and guys are going to have bounce back seasons. Like you talk about Barzal, and the points are going to be there, right? I think to move the puck up as quickly as possible, to have Noah Dobson playing the way he is. I think Ryan Pulock's in line for an even better season. Pelech as well. Like those type of guys, I think you see their potential. And then there's some games you're like, wow, they can get to another level. And that's what I think encouraged them to maybe spice things up when it comes to the Islanders offense. Because I think we're all in unison that the Islanders are going to be a better offensive team again than people are giving them credit for. I think a lot of people are just sleeping on the Islanders going into this season, maybe more so. And again, it's a recency thing because they missed the playoffs last year. But let's not forget a good chunk of that roster that went to back-to-back conference finals is still with this team, right?
Right, absolutely. And I think that's just exactly the way Islander fans like it, right? They like being the
Yeah.
underdog, they like being spoken
Yeah.
about in negative connotation and then the
Mm-hmm.
prove people wrong
You're telling
mentality,
me.
which which the team is taking on at this point too. They're all talking about how they have a bit of a chip on their shoulder, ready to come in. The one of the point projections I like there is Ryan Pulock at 40 points, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I look at his history. He scored 35, he scored 37, he scored 35 in three consecutive seasons. The big thing for me there is his goal totals. He scored 10, 9, and 10 in three consecutive years. That's a lot from the blue line, in my opinion. You could see another season like that from him. Just because 2 seasons ago he had that dreadful year where he only scored like a couple of goals. I think it was one or two in the 56 game season, but he had a 1.2 shooting percentage. But 40 points, that has to say, you can see the puck going in the net a little bit more now, right?
Yeah, and a big time reason is that bomb of a shot, right? Like he has
Yeah.
one of the best top shots in the league. And I just think if you can find a way to utilize that, whether it's on the power play, whether it's 5-on-5, 5-on-3, like you do so. Like, before it came on, we were joking about the Mighty Ducks D2 poster. Fulton Reed had a blast of a shot. Just get it off. Not to compare Pulock to read. But I mean, it's one of those things where if you can find those holes, if you're him, to get that shot off more times than not, it's going to be tough for the opposing netminder to stop. I don't care if it's Vasilevsky. I don't care who it is. So I think they're going to try to find a way to utilize him, ignite him a bit more in their offense than they have in the past. And I think you look again at the playmakers on the roster, namely Mathew Barzal, to put it on a tee for him. Because I think on that alone, knowing how hard he can shoot the puck, he should score a couple more goals than he has in the past couple of years.
1 out of 5, right, Nick? 1 out of 5.
Yeah, there you go. I love
Uh,
the reference.
I think the most interesting one to me, though, out of the top four in the Islanders' defense, is Alexander Romanov, and not just because he's the newest Islander on the team, the only new Islander on the team, but just because you can see why Dobson, Pollock, and Pelech are projected to something close that they've already done before, right? Pelech with 28 points last season. Pollock has a history of scoring 35 points, and Dobson had 51 points last season. But Romanov, his highest total, his career high in the NHL was 13 points. And in the KHL, I think his highest point total was like 7. So what's causing the
Mhm.
optimism there for Romanov? You alluded to it a little bit with the deployment in Montreal, but is there anything else there that causes optimism?
I know John had a hot take earlier. Here's my hot take. I think this is Mikhail Sergachev 2.0, if you know what I'm saying, where Montreal
Ooh, I've
dealt
I've
this
heard this
guy
before.
and he turns into a stud. I just think Romanov's a guy who is continuing to grow. He's 22. Like I understand they got Kirby Doc. I understand there's new management and a new regime, but to deal a defenseman, and you look now and what does this team need? The Montreal Canadiens is D and young D. So I understand to get you have to give. So I understand that whole conversation, but it's pretty much Drouin for Sergachev, and it's now Doc for Romanov. That's how I know I'm handicapping it at least. I just think the Islanders see a lot of potential. I think as a guy who can eat up minutes, a big time hitter, I think Islanders fans will fall in love with this guy really, really quickly of how physical he plays the game, can kill penalties. And again, he can run a power play from time to time. I just think he's a perfect example player that could benefit from a change of scenery. And again, he's just 22. And we know in this day and age, we know in the NHL world that, a lot of young defensemen don't really hit their peak till they're about 25, 26, 27. So, yeah, I'm encouraged by this pickup. I know they gave up quite a bit to get him, but it's a very Lou Lamoriello type pickup. Do not sleep on Romanov.
Yeah, I hear that, and I think the Islanders are the way they justified this was that you hope to draft an Alexander Romanov at
Mm-hmm.
13th overall, and that's why they
Yep.
made that trade. And the crazy thing to me was I didn't know this until after the trade happened. I was doing a little bit of research, but Romanov and Noah Dobson were born just a day apart, and you could see them being a
Okay.
tandem. Heading into this season, Pollock and Pelech are probably going to be back together, and Mayfield's going to be on the third pair with player X soon to be named. And so it kind of looks like Romanov and Dobson are going to be together. They're going to be hopefully a tandem for a long time in this league, and they could be one of the better defensive pairs moving forward. Maybe one that can flourish into a first pairing tandem for the Islanders.
Yeah, that's very, very scary when you think about it on paper, especially given the season that Dobson's coming off. Like, Light really, really hit offensively. I think defensively he was much better than people give him credit for last season. And I just think it's your classic, like, strong defensive defenseman and strong offensive defenseman and all-world defenseman potential in Dobson. You put them together, and there's going to be like a give and take type aspect where, hey, you skate up this time, I'll stay back, And I think as they play and get more reps with each other and feel each other out, I think to your point, it definitely has the potential to be a very, very, strong decor in general, but pairing in general. I think you look at that top four. I think the Islanders should be feeling really, really good, at least on paper, as to what they've put forward. But I think that's obviously why they picked him up, is to put him with Dobson here.
Yeah, and that's got to be the idea, right? Like I said, born just a day apart from each other, both 22 years old. So moving forward, that could be a scary tandem moving forward. But speaking of tandems, moving into the crease situation for the Islanders here, Lane Lambert alluded to the possibility that Sorokin, or not the possibility, he said Sorokin and Varlamov are going to be competing for crease time this season. If you had to put a number to it, Nick, how many starts does Sorokin get versus how many does Varlamov get this year?
So I understand what they're doing. You want to create a healthy competition, and we've seen this since day one, since Sorokin came to North America. But I think you can't ignore the obvious that Ilya Sorokin is on the precipice of being like an elite goalie in this league, and you have
Yeah.
Varlamov, who you're clearly moving on from at some point in time. Like you just can't afford him with the salary cap situation. You have to go with a cheaper option, and Sorokin's ready to take that baton. So I wouldn't be shocked if we see 55 starts from Sorokin. Like I think there's going to be some pushback from Varlamov, but I think when push comes to shove, and assuming this team makes the Stanley Cup playoffs, there will be no question, at least in my world at that time, who's starting that first game. Whereas maybe the last couple of years where this team was a playoff team, you had your questions, or maybe it favored Varlamov. And you can't forget too, like the ideology is a bit different now with Barry Trotz now in the mix. Who knows who Lane Lambert, favors too. But again, if I'm handicapping things right now, which I am, I think Ilya Sorokin will be the number one goaltender at some point in time this season.
Yeah, and based on he had some really good numbers last season. I know he had a 2.40 GAA, and he had something like a 9.25 save percentage, which is
Yeah,
good numbers. But considering the team that he was in net for, and how often they were losing and how many goals they were giving up, you
yeah.
could see a situation where with a better blue line in front of him, and hopefully a better team overall, Sorokin in the Vezina conversation this year.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And just to continue on with my point, like 82 games, I could see 50, 55 starts for Sorokin and around 30, 32 starts for Varlamov, if that makes sense. Like I do think they're leaning towards Sorokin being that guy, but definitely, Sorokin comes to mind. Thatcher Demko with the Vancouver Canucks. I think you're really going to start to see some new blood come to the forefront when it comes to that Vezina conversation, to join the likes of Vasilevsky, Shesterkin, Saros, Markstrom. Like there's that next wave of goalie, and I think we're going to see it this year. I think Sorokin's going to be in that combo for sure, and he has in the last couple of years too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I said last year I think he's a top three goaltender. I mean, you saw the
Yeah.
flashes of brilliance, all of the highlight reels that he gave himself over in the KHL. You expected him to come to the NHL and maybe show a little bit of regression, right? He can't be that good.
Hmm.
It's the KHL, but all the respect in the world to that league over there. It's excellent. But when you come to the NHL, you didn't expect to see more of the same, and he got better and better as every game went on. And a couple of struggles here and there when the Islanders really were down last season, but man, the highlight reel saves that he's made night in and night out, just the jaw dropping ones, especially that one against Panarin. I don't know if you remember watching that one that night when the net was wide open and there was just a gimme
Yeah.
goal for Artemi Panarin. He just reaches back with his paddle and midair swipes it out of the air. So and you anticipate seeing more of that, which he did receive save of the year for 2021-22. So I do anticipate him being in the Vezina conversation next season.
Yeah, there's a reason why the analytics community is horny about the guy, right? He's an exceptional goalie, but his numbers, his metrics, they're phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick, I think that's all we got for you this week. One last question we have for you. It's going to be the way too early edition of this, and John's going to hate me for asking. But when the Islanders are inevitably in the playoffs by the time the trade deadline comes, what's your way too early prediction for the Islanders at the deadline? Who will be in blue and orange by the time February rolls around?
I'll
I
give you a
like to
second to
think that,
think about it.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
unless
go
you
ahead.
have something, go for it. I was gonna say, is somebody has to move out. I think that's the PTO. If something was gonna come in on, especially on defense, that third pair next to Mayfield is open. They're at their roster limit. So that's kind of what that's a huge question too. Like Lamoriello struggled to move a contract out, and now it's not beyond that. Like you're at your roster limit in the middle of the season. That's the interesting part too. So I don't think the question is who do they get, but who's leaving the team. Like they just unless somebody's going on waivers, something like that. Like it's a more
Or the
complicated
inevitable
question.
injury?
The inevitable injury, something like that. But I don't know that you want to bank on that necessarily. Look at Lee went down and they did go on a run, but they really could have used that guy. So you
Mhm.
don't that's a tough thing. So just to add a layer onto it, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, I was sort of Googling the free agent crop. I was just saying that, I like to think that they're going to be in on Patrick Kane behind the scenes, and who knows if it comes to fruition. I think it's very, very likely he's dealt at the deadline. I think it's going to be a saga that plays out all season. I think if you're looking for a defenseman, John Klingberg could be the play. I don't think Anaheim's going to make the Stanley Cup playoffs. I think there's a bit of correlation with like a James Van Riemsdyk, who's a free agent. Just there's going to be guys that are available that we don't think about right now, if that makes sense. I know it's a tough answer. I'm trying to
Sure. No.
handicap who would be that guy. So I'll say John Klingberg. I don't know off the top of my head.
Interesting that you went to defense. I figured you would go forward, but I will echo the sentiment that you said with Patrick Kane, and that's something that I've
Yeah.
been told behind the scenes as well. Watch out for that Lou Lamoriello guy in their time together with Team USA. So something to keep an eye on there. But John knows this. There's a drum that I've been banging on for a little while now. He's going to be a free agent headed into this summer, and I'm banging on that Timo Meyer drum because what the heck are the Sharks doing over in San Jose? If that guy is made available and is no longer going to be in the future plans with San Jose, you pry that guy as fast as you can from
Mhm.
them. And if it costs you a guy like William Defoe or Naturatu, you do that, right? Because his age is perfect with the window of Mathew Barzal and what his trajectory will be. And if you pair a guy like Timo Meyer with Barzal, you have only limitless opportunities for your team can do adding a guy like him at the deadline and for your future.
Yeah, that's going to be obviously a big name to watch between now and the deadline. Tarasenko's another. I think if St. Louis is somehow not in the conversation to make the playoffs, I think Tarasenko's just been the perfect match since day one, guys. I would have liked to see them get him like 2 years ago. It didn't happen. The guy asked for a trade, still there. To the best of my knowledge, still hasn't rescinded that trade request, and he's still a St. Louis Blues. So at the very least, I think they'll be very, very active, and there'll be some attractive names next summer. I know we don't want to hear that, but I'm right there with you. Meyer's the guy I would chase because, again, the age factor and the potential factor.
Yeah, that something that Lamoriello has been traditional with before is when his team is
Yeah.
gonna head to the playoffs, he's there to make the upgrade. We saw it with Palmieri, we saw it with JG Pageau, and those guys stuck
Mhm.
around. So there's reason to believe that will happen again if they're in the conversation. In the summer is a different story, but that's a conversation for next summer. As of right now, Nick, we thank you so much for joining us today. Do us a favor and do everybody listening a favor. Plug yourself. Let us know where we can read you, listen to you, and tweet at you on Twitter. Plug yourself, please.
Yeah, firstly, it was my pleasure. Number two, I think Islanders fans need to get off my back because they see me on social media. They don't actually listen to my content because I actually, give this team considerable props, and I have since the beginning. Nobody knows the genesis of the story as to why Islanders fans hate me to begin with, but we'll leave that for next podcast. And as for where you can see my information, sportsnet.ca. I host NHL Fantasy on Ice podcast alongside Pete Jensen and at the Golden Muzzy on Twitter and Instagram. And again, I appreciate your time today. It's a lot of fun. And believe it or not, I like the Islanders more than people think I do. And the day oneers know that, and that's why they respect me.
Absolutely. The title of this episode will 100% be, John, that Nick Alberga loves the New York Islanders. Once again, thank you for joining us today, Nick. Please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to or watch the show. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Nassau Hockey. You can find my work at the Fourth Period. You can find John's work at the Hockey Writers. Make sure to check out Isles Fix, an excellent curated Islanders newsletter that's sure to be returning very shortly with the season about to start. And until next time, everyone, let's go Islanders.